again to Discovering Truth, and I am Pastor Forbes from Abiding Word Ministries. Tonight we want to discuss something which I'm sure it's going to be of some help, some importance, some amount of guidance for all of our lives as we pursue what we believe is God's purpose for us. I'm always reminded of the fact that I am not just passing through the world. I should live life in a meaningful, significant, and purposeful way, because every opportunity that I have as breathing God's air and oxygen, I must use it to count for, one, God's glory, two, for the benefit of human society, to the adding of value to the quality of life, and certainly leaving a legacy for tomorrow. There is something called principle, and there is something called practice. And sometimes, especially in a discussion, especially when it's a heated discussion, you can be arguing with somebody and you are arguing based on principle, but from the principles you give the example of a practice. And more often than not, the person you are arguing against tends to jump on that example or that practice and fight back and say, no, it's not like that. And most times you find yourself coming back to the person and saying that I am not talking about that particular example. I am talking about the principle. Because once a principle is enshrined and embedded in your heart, then it works anywhere. Once a principle becomes almost second nature in your life, it works anywhere because it is a principle. It's not a one-off practice. It's not a perchance occurrence. It is a principle. It's a set of guidelines that has been worked out over and over. Now, our lives must be based on principles, good principles, ethical principles, prosperous principles, advancing, forward-looking principles. But unfortunately, sometimes people's lives are characterized by principles which are negative, which are retrogressive, which are not empowering, which are not building. But they are principles. What informs theft, what informs criminality, what informs sexual harassment, what informs victimization and cruelty, what informs racism. It's a principle. It's something. Everything is based upon some sort of a principle. But once a principle has been founded in our lives, then practices become easy, irrespective of whether they are right practices or wrong practices. And therefore, it's important to go to principle more than to example and practice. In the Bible, there is a young boy. He was 16, 17. He was one of many children, at least about 8 brothers, maybe sisters, we are not sure. His father's name was Jesse. Jesse was the father of many boys, including one boy called David or Dauda. Now, biblical history has it that Jesse's mother was not the wife that was married by Jesse. So, for lack of a better phrase and characterization, Jesse was what is called an outside child. It's not a very good thing to say, but that's how it is said, an outside child. That means he was not born in the marriage. He was not born in wedlock. Maybe he was born before or during, but not within the confines of the marital home. So history makes us understand also, Bible history, that, and I think that tends to happen sometimes because there are all kinds of dynamics of the outside child not inheriting with the inside children and all that kind of two different mothers and all that. So David was not necessarily such a special boy in his father's eyes. Maybe he was, particularly to his father, because after all, that was his seed. That is his son or his daughter, as the case might sometimes be. But sometimes the dynamic of a marriage, a wife and in-laws and friends and society and pressure and all that So there are all kinds of funny contraptions that go on. The outside child is met at a junction and given money, and his or her school fees is paid for through an uncle or something, because his presence or her presence is a reminder of some kind of unfaithfulness that occurred. Howbeit, it's life, because as we know, life sometimes is not always as we expect it to be. So David was like that. And apart from him being the youngest, he was not like a special boy. So his father Jesse gave him an assignment to go into the fields every day and take care of his father's sheep, goats, livestock. And David did that every day without expecting any reward mechanism, without coming to the dinner table and telling his stories of the experiences that he had as he was taking care of his father's sheep. It's the kind of job you give somebody to just take them out of sight so that their presence is not a continual reminder of your mistakes and all the attendant problems. Because sometimes when you make a mistake, there are people who are very good at beating you for that one mistake, even though the mistake was 40 years ago, as it were. But in David's taking care of his father's sheep, goats, and livestock, there are two things that are critical, or maybe three. One, from the life of David, we get to see that he found God, which means that there is no situation that's big enough for you to say you cannot find God. In the midst of calamity, in the midst of trouble, in the midst of pain, in the midst of scandal, in the midst of stigmatization, in the midst of poverty, in the midst of ill health, you must be able to look to God. And David himself, when God had brought a great new birthing in his life, wrote one of the beautiful psalms we have in the Bible that goes like this, that I will lift up mine eyes far beyond the hills where I can see God, because God made the heavens and the earth. So David found God. It doesn't mean you can only find God in tragedy, but it's definitely sure that you can find God in tragedy, because your attention is wrapped for God then. When you have a painful situation, you're ready for God. Secondly, David built his skills in the midst of a less than the best situation. He built his skills. He learned how to catapult. He learned how to protect the livestock he was taking care of, even though he never had a reward. He wasn't going home for a monthly pocket money. He was not being rewarded in any way. Thirdly, David never submitted himself to the bitterness that could envelop his life because of his situation. He could tell that that job is a demotion. That job is there getting rid of you. That job is there keeping you somewhere where you are not mainstreamed in the activities of what goes on. And that happens all the time. It happens in politics, happens in religion, happens in relationships of all sorts. Once people think that maybe you're a person of your own mind, you verbalize your thoughts, you articulate them well, and they go against the grain of everybody's thinking, yet they seem to be right and sensible, and especially when they are not taken, and after some time people see that had they known, they would have listened to you. If they are humble, they will take you on board. If they are not, they keep you in one corner and do all they can to frustrate you. Life is such that the things that tend to frustrate us have within themselves the power to make us become better. And so with every kind of setback, opposition, barrier, we always have two options. The option of using it to our advantage, or the option of collapsing under its weight. And so David refused to give in to bitterness. That reminds me of